Once, in a vast kingdom called Azor, there lived a king named Akwasi. His rule was unlike any other. Akwasi was not only known for his wealth and strength, but also for his many wives. He had married over 1,000 women, each from a different corner of his kingdom. These women were not ordinary queens. They were powerful, wise, and skilled in various arts. It was said that Akwasi's throne could only remain strong if he had 1,000 queens. But no one knew the true reason behind this strange tradition. Akwasi was born into a royal family, and the throne of Azor had always been passed down through an ancient line of rulers. However, the kings of Azor had to follow a mysterious prophecy that said a king could only rule for as long as he had 1,000 queens by his side. This was not just a matter of wealth or power. It was a matter of life and death. The prophecy said that without 1,000 wives, the king would be overthrown by the spirits of the land, and the kingdom would fall into ruin. When Akwasi was just a young prince, his father, King Kwame, had warned him about the curse. "You must marry 1,000 women to protect this throne, Akwasi," his father had told him. "Each queen holds a part of the kingdom's power. When they stand together, you are invincible. But if even one queen leaves, your strength will fade." At first, Akwasi had not understood. He was young and eager to prove himself, but as the years passed, he saw the truth in his father's words. His father's reign had been long and prosperous, with 1,000 queens by his side. But when his father's last queen, Queen Amara, passed away, the kingdom had begun to struggle. The crops failed, the rivers dried up, and the people became restless. Akwasi's father, weakened by the loss, had been forced to step down, leaving Akwasi to inherit the throne. Akwasi understood the importance of the prophecy, and so he began the difficult task of marrying 1,000 women. It was not just a political move, it was a necessity to keep the kingdom alive. The people of Azor, who had once been proud of their king's many marriages, started to question the need for so many queens. They wondered if Akwasi was truly fit to rule, or if the prophecy was simply a myth. Despite the whispers, Akwasi continued his quest. The first queen he married was Queen Adama, a woman known for her beauty and wisdom. She came from the northern mountains where the winds howled fiercely. Akwasi was captivated by her strength and intelligence, and together they ruled over the northern lands. The kingdom began to prosper again, with crops growing tall and rivers flowing. But Queen Adama was not enough. Akwasi needed many more wives to protect the kingdom. He traveled to the east, where he married Queen Naya, a healer who could cure any sickness with just her hands. Her magic was said to be so powerful that no illness could spread in her presence. As soon as she joined the court, Akwasi's kingdom became a place where disease was unheard of, and people came from far and wide to seek her blessings. As the years passed, Akwasi married more queens, each with their own unique gifts. Some were warriors, others were wise advisors, and a few were skilled in the art of magic. His court grew large, and with it, the kingdom's wealth and strength. But Akwasi could feel the weight of the throne growing heavier. The more queens he married, the more complicated his life became. Each queen had her own desires, her own dreams, and her own expectations of the king. He had to balance their needs, while also making sure that the kingdom did not fall into chaos. Akwasi had built an empire, but he soon realized that with so many queens, ruling the kingdom was not as simple as he had hoped. The queens began to form alliances among themselves, some supporting one another while others grew jealous of the power that certain queens held. The rivalry between the queens began to threaten the stability of the kingdom, and Akwasi found himself stuck in a web of politics, love, and power. One evening, while he sat on his throne surrounded by his many queens, Akwasi began to question the prophecy. Was the throne truly bound by marriage, or had he become trapped by his own decisions? Was it possible that the key to the kingdom's survival lay in a different path? His thoughts were interrupted when a messenger arrived, breathless from running. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "there is word of a new threat to your throne. A group of rebels has risen in the west, led by a mysterious figure known only as the Ghost of Azor." Akwasi stood up, his heart racing. The rebels threatened not just his reign, but the very kingdom that had prospered under his rule. He looked at his queens, who watched him silently. Each of them had a role to play, but it was now up to Akwasi to decide how to fight this new challenge. The news of the rebellion spread quickly through the kingdom. Akwasi knew that the threat posed by the ghost of Azor could destroy everything he had worked for. His 1,000 queens, each with their own power, held the kingdom together. But they were divided. Rivalries between them were growing, and the unity that had once kept the kingdom strong was beginning to crumble. The ghost of Azor was no ordinary enemy. He was a mysterious leader whose name had been whispered in the shadows for years. Legend said that the ghost was a man who had once been a trusted advisor to the king, but he had disappeared under strange circumstances. Now he had returned to challenge Akwasi's throne, and he had the support of many dissatisfied villagers and nobles who believed the king's reign was a failure. Akwasi gathered his queens in the great hall, where the air was thick with tension. He looked at each of them. Some were nervous, others were defiant, but none spoke. The weight of his decision pressed on him. He could not fight this battle alone. He needed the strength of all 1,000 queens. "Listen carefully, my queens," Akwasi said, his voice firm. "A rebellion is rising in the west, led by the ghost of Azor. We must unite if we are to protect this kingdom. Our enemies will try to tear us apart, but if we stand together, we will remain strong." The queens exchanged glances. Queen Adama, the wise and powerful queen from the northern mountains, was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, we have always stood by your side, but the division among us grows. There are those among us who feel overlooked, and others who seek to claim more power. The kingdom is no longer united, and that is why the rebels have found their strength." Akwasi felt a heavy burden in his heart. Queen Adama was right. The queens, once united by the common goal of protecting the throne, were now divided by jealousy and rivalry. Some queens felt that their contributions to the kingdom were not recognized, while others sought to gain more influence over Akwasi. Their desires had become as dangerous as the rebellion itself. "I understand," Akwasi said, his voice softening. "But now is not the time for division. We must put aside our differences and fight as one. If we do not, the ghost of Azor will destroy everything we have built." But the queens were not so easily convinced. Queen Nia, the healer, who had the power to cure any sickness, stepped forward. "My king," she said, her tone calm but firm, "we have been loyal to you for many years, but it is clear that your kingdom is suffering. The people are angry, and they look to us for guidance. We must address the unrest in the kingdom before we can fight our enemies." Akwasi's mind raced. Queen Nia was right. The kingdom's people had grown disillusioned with the endless power struggles within the royal court. They were hungry, angry, and tired of hearing promises of prosperity that never seemed to reach them. The rebellion was a sign of their frustration. "We will begin by visiting the villages," Akwasi said, his decision made. "We will listen to the people, address their concerns, and show them that we are not just a kingdom of queens, but a kingdom that cares for its people. Only then will we be able to unite against the rebels." The queens nodded, though some were still hesitant. Akwasi could see that they did not fully understand the gravity of the situation. His mind turned to his most trusted advisor, Queen Amara, who had passed away years ago. She had been the one to keep the queens united, the one who had understood the delicate balance between power and compassion. Without her, Akwasi felt lost. As the days passed, Akwasi and his queens traveled across the kingdom, visiting villages and listening to the people. They saw the poverty that had gripped the land and the anger that simmered beneath the surface. The people spoke of the king's many marriages, of how the wealth of the kingdom seemed to flow only to the palace, while they suffered in silence. One evening, as they traveled through a small village, Akwasi met with a group of elders. The eldest, a woman with a wise and weathered face, spoke to him. "Your Majesty," she said, "the ghost of Azor speaks of justice. He tells us that the king and his queens live in luxury while the people starve. He promises to bring an end to the suffering. We, the people, want change." Akwasi's heart sank. The rebellion had more support than he had realized. The people had lost faith in him, and they saw the ghost of Azor as a symbol of hope. The path ahead was not clear. How could he defeat the ghost when his own people were turning against him? "I understand your pain," Akwasi said quietly. "But know this, without the unity of the queens, This kingdom will fall, and without this kingdom there will be no hope for anyone. I ask for your patience as we work to restore the balance." The elders were silent, and Akwasi could feel the weight of their judgment. As the night grew darker, he sat alone in his tent, thinking about the future. The queens were divided, the people were restless, and the rebellion was growing stronger. Akwasi knew that if he did not act quickly, his throne and his kingdom would be lost forever. The days passed quickly as Akwasi continued his travels across the kingdom. The journey had opened his eyes to the harsh realities the people faced. No matter how much wealth the kingdom had, the common folk were suffering. As they moved from village to village, Akwasi saw the growing discontent in the eyes of his people. They no longer saw him as their protector, but as a king who had forgotten them. At each village, the ghost of Azor's influence seemed to grow stronger. Rebel groups appeared, speaking of revolution, and many began to join their cause. The ghost promised change. He told the people that they would no longer live in fear of a king who had so many wives, yet paid so little attention to their needs. He painted a picture of a new world, where every citizen would have a say, and the riches of the land would be shared among all. To many, his promises sounded like a dream come true. Akwasi, torn between his loyalty to the prophecy and the growing unrest in his kingdom, found himself at a crossroads. His queens were divided too. Some of them, like Queen Adama, urged him to take swift action against the rebellion. "We cannot let this traitor, this ghost, destroy everything we've built," she would say. Others, like Queen Nia, were more cautious. "The people are hurting, Your Majesty," she advised. "We must first heal the land before we can fight any enemy. Only then will they see you as their true leader." Akwasi knew that the throne of Azor was bound by the prophecy. He needed 1,000 queens to rule. But as the days wore on, he began to question the prophecy itself. Was it possible that his many marriages, which were meant to protect the kingdom, had instead caused the very rift that threatened to tear it apart? Could there be another way to save Azor? One that didn't require so many queens? And if so, what would that mean for his reign and for his future? One evening, as they camped under the stars in a quiet valley, Akwasi sat with his most trusted queen, Queen Nia. She had always been his calm in the storm, her gentle wisdom guiding him when he was unsure. She had the gift of seeing things as they truly were, and Akwasi valued her counsel above all others. "Your Majesty," Queen Nia said, her voice soft as they sat by the fire, "I know you have been struggling with the weight of the prophecy, but remember this. Your strength does not lie in the number of queens you have, but in your ability to unite them. The people do not care how many wives you have. They care about the kingdom you lead. They care about whether their lives improve or grow worse." Akwasi gazed into the fire, the flames flickering in his eyes. He knew that she was right. The people had not rebelled because of his many marriages. They had rebelled because they felt abandoned. They saw a king who lived in a palace of luxury, surrounded by queens, while they struggled to survive. "I understand, Nia," Akwasi said quietly. "But how do I bring them back? How do I restore their faith?" Queen Nia smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Start with the people. Do not hide behind the throne or behind the queens. Show them you are one of them. Lead with kindness, with justice, and with humility. If they see that you care for them, they will follow you. And if you win the hearts of your people, the ghost of Azor will have no power." Akwasi felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He had been too focused on his position as king, on maintaining the prophecy, on protecting the throne at all costs. But in doing so, he had neglected what truly mattered, the well-being of his people. The next day, Akwasi made a decision. He would return to the capital and address the people himself. He would stand before them, not as a distant king, but as a man who understood their pain. He would ask for their forgiveness, and he would promise to rule with justice and fairness, regardless of the prophecy or the number of queens he had. When Akwasi and his queens arrived back in the capital, the city was filled with whispers. The people had heard that the king was returning, and many wondered what he would do. The ghost of Azor's rebellion had gained momentum, and some feared that Akwasi's return would only bring more conflict. Akwasi stood on the steps of the palace, facing the crowd that had gathered below. The queen stood behind him, each of them silently watching, uncertain of what was to come. The people's eyes were filled with expectation, and Akwasi could feel the weight of their gaze upon him. "My people of Azor," Akwasi began, his voice carrying across the square, "I stand before you today not as your king, but as a man who has heard your cries. I have seen the suffering in your villages, the hunger and the fear. For too long, I have focused on the throne, and in doing so, I have forgotten what truly matters. I have neglected you." The crowd was silent. Some of the people looked at him with skepticism, others with hope. "I promise you, from this day forward, I will rule with fairness and justice," Akwasi continued. "I will listen to your needs, and I will work with you to rebuild this kingdom. The time of division is over. We will stand together, united as one people." The queens behind him looked at each other, unsure of what to make of the king's words. Akwasi could feel the tension in the air, but he knew that this was the first step toward healing the kingdom. The ghost of Azor's rebellion had reached its peak, and the people had heard the king's plea. Now it was time to prove that his words were more than just promises. Akwasi stood before his people, his heart pounding in his chest. The streets of the capital were filled with whispers, and the people's eyes were filled with uncertainty. The rebellion led by the ghost of Azor had spread far and wide, and the kingdom was on the brink of collapse. "My people of Azor," Akwasi's voice rang out, steady but filled with regret. "I have failed you. I have been a king consumed by power and prophecy, while you, the true heart of this kingdom, have suffered in silence." The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for what would come next. He could feel the weight of their judgment and fear. "I have been blinded by the belief that the throne could only be secured through the number of queens I have. But now, I see that it is not the number of queens that define me. It is the love and trust I earn from my people." Akwasi paused, looking at his queens who stood behind him, their faces filled with uncertainty. "I ask for your forgiveness. I will lead you not with promises, but with action. Together, we will rebuild this kingdom. A kingdom where all voices are heard and no one is left behind." As Akwasi finished speaking, a hushed murmur spread through the crowd. The ghost of Azor's influence had been powerful, but there was something in Akwasi's words, something real that made the people reconsider. The rebellion may not have been defeated, but Akwasi had shown his people the strength of humility, and it was enough to spark a glimmer of hope in their hearts. And so, in the final moments of his reign, Akwasi began to heal a kingdom torn apart, not by his many marriages, but by his willingness to change.